Hi guys. Oh my god, I just thought I might do this as a slightly different mental health update download. This is me about 15 minutes before going into an AA meeting. I'm needing to go into an AA meeting. I'm needing to get to more regular meetings. I feel, given, we've had a torrid year and a bit longer in terms of family stuff, various people we've lost, both literally and metaphorically, and I think it's fair to say that myself, and I've discussed this with Nadia and I've discussed it with my girls, I'm not practicing the program of recovery in a way that means I am in constant contact with and awareness of everything I'm feeling and how I'm presenting to those I love and those I care about. What I mean by that is I think I'm white knuckling. And just like you could have something that's called like there's a phrase called high functioning alcoholic, which is, you could be your life could be kind of careening out of control. You could be making all sorts of mistakes. You could be living dangerously, but you were still functioning in the world. You still had your relationships. You still had your work. You still, you could still function in a way that, for not everyone, obviously not those closest to you, but for the vast majority of people, they'd be like, oh, right, really? It's that bad, is it, you're drinking? Well, I think the same can happen emotionally. I mean, I've talked before about the roller coaster of being an emotional alcoholic. I think, alcoholism, addiction, and drugs and drink were part of my story. It was a means of putting a band-aid on sadness, upset, discomfort, trauma, all the rest of it, which in itself, all those things in themselves, led to conditions like bipolar, ADHD, etc. And so alcohol and addiction and drugs became a means for managing those impulses. And when you remove the literal substance, and interestingly at the moment I'm on a keto diet, and I want to talk about in another one of these uploads how apparently being on a keto diet can really help with bipolar. And interestingly, I feel that there is some edges being taken off my bipolar by being on a keto diet, which is kind of curious and odd. But I want to read into the potential science of it more. I don't know how well researched it is. But anyway, sticking with this, I just think, not surprisingly, I've struggled to be able to manage on my own and manage, or ask those who love me to help me manage on my own, because there's only so much you should ask and can ask of those around you. Not to literally help you, but when you're struggling, there's only so much they can say, there's only so much they can do. And I just think we all got to the end of last year, me, Nadia, as a family, we all got to the end of last year literally gasping for breath. But white knuckling is when you're just stridently, resolutely, desperately clinging on, and in order to kind of sustain the bare minimum of functionality, being nice, being warm, being not being eggshelly, being consistent, relatively consistent in your emotional kind of makeup, in your mood, not being sort of absent in a way that isn't damaging to anyone but just leads those who love you to be concerned. All those symptoms, they're all symptoms of essentially just clinging on, holding on. And it's not that necessarily putting a regular AA meeting into my system will entirely resolve that. I mean, one of the biggest ironies, or contradictions if you like, is that whenever you go to, and I used to go to regular AA meetings a lot back in the past, and what I've done in recent years is I've used them as kind of band-aids. I've kind of dropped in to remind myself, to reacquaint myself, to reconnect with the kind of tenets of recovery. But it really is a program of self-care and recovery that requires you working at it. And I've talked at great length elsewhere. I talked about my chat to do with going into rehab, about how it's like a successful marriage. You can't just expect it to happen, and you can't just get indignant if it doesn't happen naturally without you putting in the graft. And when I say just because you have to put in the graft to get something like a successful relationship or a successful friendship or a successful work relationship, that's not a failure of it. That doesn't mean it's not real. That doesn't mean it's not authentic. I think we've been sold a really kind of mythical idea that unless everything goes swimmingly smoothly, unless everything naturally connects, unless love just sings from the heart without any kind of blemish or issue, it can't be real. And actually, real love is the nitty-gritty and dirty, grimy, gritty slog of just chipping away at it and working at it, and you have moments of great joy because you've worked at making sure you can have those moments of great joy. I'd say that almost all relationships are like that. I think even relationships between parents and their children, from parents towards their children, and from children towards their parents. I think there's an idea, for example, amongst kids, that it's the parents that should do all the legwork, and that's not the case. It's a two-way street. It's about putting in graft. It's like, I remember Nadia saying the other day, and she has a much bigger social circle than me, obviously. And she said, you know what, sometimes, and she doesn't mean this as a criticism of her friends, but she says it's really hard work sometimes to keep up with all of my friends in a way that's meaningful for them and meaningful for her. Now, she doesn't regret it, but it's like she said, you've got to be conscious in doing it. Otherwise, many things fall by the wayside. And what I'm trying to get to is I've allowed the regularity and the consistency of an AA meeting in my life to let me kind of disattach myself from if you like, the graft of staying sober. Not just staying sober, I think I will always stay sober, but staying sober in a way that means I have serenity. I mean, I've talked about that before too. So you know, I haven't had serenity for a long while. I don't get it even if I just plug in for a couple of sessions or a couple of AA meetings when I've hit a bit of a crisis. It's kind of like A&E or emergency department 12-step recovery. That's not how it works. It's about marinating yourself in the steps, in the processes, in the actions, in the self-awareness, and it's finding not the God, if God isn't your thing, but finding that spiritual foundation. So here I am, about to go in, not having gone in, with a plan to go to this meeting every week for the foreseeable future. And what I'm going to try and do is talk to you both before I go in and after I come out. Obviously, the point of Alcoholics Anonymous is that you respect the anonymity of people, so I will never be sharing who said what. Not that I ever know who they are, you only ever get given first names. But if something in one of the meetings has struck a chord with me, I will share it in the broadest of brushstroke terms. And I just want to kind of do this almost like an experiment to sort of see if there's that light. I always remember when I was in rehab, Nadia said when she came to visit me, we used to have family days, and she said, I remember coming into the building at Roehampton, and you and all your kind of peer group, if you like, were coming down the stairs, a bunch of alkies and addicts. And as she said, as you came down the stairs, she said you had a brightness and a lightness in your eyes, which she kind of called the, what did she call it? The primary brightness or whatever it was. And I want that back again. I want that thing in me that's just there, that I remember someone else in our lives, actually, who was very close to us for a long time, who themselves struggled with addiction and substance problems, said, I remember seeing you, Mark, after you came out of rehab, and they said, I really wish I had some of what you had, which was serenity. So bear with me if it goes, well, basically I'm just going to try and be as searingly honest as possible before and after going into these things. But I think it's fair to say I have literally been white knuckling for too long. I think Nadia has. I think we all have. I think metaphorically many of you guys watching have. I don't think white knuckling and struggling with compulsive behavior or compulsive fear and anxiety. They're all addictions. So I don't necessarily think it's just about someone who used to drink who doesn't drink. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. I haven't drunk for 21 years, and here's a case in point. I do always feel, and I wonder whether this has kind of been part of the reason that's kind of held me at bay with some meetings or regular meetings, is that how do I square the idea that I've managed to stay sober for 21 years, which when you go into an AA room is quite an amazing number. It's an amazing amount of time. And what tends and sometimes can happen is there is an assumption from everyone around you when you say, oh, I'm 21 years sober, that you've kind of got all the answers. And that's not, they're not being sort of rude in that or presumptuous, but I would, if someone said, oh, 20, I'd be like, oh, right, well, you must be doing something right. And in that, you must be doing something right means they may sort of step away from you and just think, well, whatever he's going to do is going to work for him. You know, that seems like, because I remember going into meetings right at the beginning of my recovery. And when I was 2-3 years sober, I used to go to a regular meeting in Pimlico. It was the most kind of meaningful and constant meeting I used to go to. And I remember thinking, fuck me, how will I ever get to that many years of sobriety? And I would feel almost a little bit kind of starstruck and intimidated by the person who had that much sobriety. So it's weird that you kind of gain a certain sort of, not star status, but it's inapplicable, because I'm actually in there feeling exactly the same as I did when I was like day 1 or day 2 going in. Nervous, wide-eyed, needing to quell that deep discomfort and upset and distress and rapidity of heartbeat. So, you know, nothing's changed there. It's literally one day at a time. That's why I always say to anyone who's got any amount of sobriety, literally, you are a fucking Jedi warrior if you've stayed sober just for today, because that's all you've got. That's all we can talk about is today. Anyway, I'll see you on the other side. Wow, fuckety wow. Well, there you go. Oh my God. So the meeting I went to is a step meeting, which means each meeting, you know, focuses on a step. And tonight it was focusing on step 3. Made a decision to hand our will over to the power of God, or a God as you understand it to be. And so we read the step. You read the step, everyone takes a sort of paragraph, and all I'm hearing, you know, in the old days when I first got sober, my first concern was, how am I going to fucking believe in a God? You know, I don't do God. What is God? What is a higher power? What do they mean by God? So higher power is fluid. I've kind of got my head around that. But the bit that was screaming out at me from the full step, reading the full step, 4 or 5 pages in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book. And then, of course, there was a wonderful chair. I won't say the name of the person, but a wonderful chair where the relatability, the parallels in using drink and creativity and the devil, the dance with the devil, the Faustian dance with the devil around creativity, ego, self-expression, but also actually at the heart of it being a sort of relatively shy and vulnerable and uncomfortable in your skin person. I had so much relatability. And when you have a chair, and the chair in a meeting is when someone shares their life story, you know, for 20-25 minutes. I mean, weirdly, so much about our childhood was different, but everything else he described was just pinging. Talk about social media relatability. It was just off the scale. Everyone in the meeting shared back, which is quite rare that, you know, a chair is so powerful that everyone shares back. But the thing that was screaming out was willingness. The word willingness, I'd never noticed. Yes, in the step, it says, made a decision to turn your will over to the power of something godlike outside of yourself. And I've always kind of focused on the God bit. But the bit that was screaming at me, and when I opened my mouth to share my part back to the meeting, was willingness. And I have been unwilling to commit regularly and comprehensively. I've still sought to circumnavigate my way around the 12-step program and going to regular meetings. Why? because I'm fearful, and I've been fearful of not being able to be the perfect alcoholic, to not do, if I'm not doing recovery in a perfect way, then I'd rather step back. There's fear, there's shame, there's worry. And there was a great guy in there who said something along the lines of, you know, too many people get hung up on the perfect way to do sobriety. Regardless of amount of time, when you do it, when you go to a meeting, there are various kind of commitments of being of service to the meeting. It might be being a greeter at the door. It might be doing the literature, putting the, you know, selling the books and the pamphlets. One might be making a cup of tea. One of the most sort of unwholesome is washing up. So of course, the secretary of the meeting said, anyone willing to wash up? So I thrust my hand up to wash up. So I've just been washing all of the mugs that everyone's drunk their tea out of and coffee. And the guy who runs the meeting just turned to me right at the end and said, do you know what, regardless of your 21 years, your 2 years, because I shared about the fact that sometimes I feel shame that I'm 21 years sober. And like he said, he said to me, you can't have shame about staying sober for 21 years. But the thing I was talking about was being sober literally in terms of no alcohol in my system, but not being sober in my life, not having serenity, feeling alcoholic, feeling white knuckly. But like he said, all you have to think about is today. You don't need to be thinking about the other 21 days. And I said to him whilst I was washing my 18th mug, I said, yeah, it's like a sober vertigo. It's like vertigo of sobriety. And he was like, that's it. It so is. Sometimes I can look back at the amount of time I've been sober and it can really fucking intimidate me. But my God, like a lightning rod, like a fucking bolt of lightning, I walked into a meeting. It was step 3. Under normal circumstances, I would fixate on the word God. That doesn't bother me. I understand what a higher power is. I have that comprehension. But the bit that rang out at me and screamed out at me, which has never stood out to me ever before, was handing your will over. And that's what I've been a failure at. But I mustn't think of it in terms of being a failure. That's the point. So I feel fired up. I feel connected. I feel a hum of relatability. It's a little bit equivalent to when me and Nadia go on the marches, or when you go to an event and everyone you know is sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. You feel solidarity, but you also feel like you don't have to explain too much. And although it's about opening your mouth in a meeting, everyone understood. Whatever's going to come out of your weird alcoholic addict brain, someone in that room's going to understand, and they're going to relate. And even if they don't, you're relating by saying it. It was a wonderful chair. It was a gift. That was a gift. Oh.